All right, let's cross to Aldrin Sapir, our reporter on the ground. He's with our East African correspondent, Sarah Kamani, in the capital, Nairobi. Aldrin, first of all, what is the temperature in the country? We had a controversial poll. Some said it was free and fair. The whole poll nullified. We've had a history of post-election violence in Kenya, and now the opposition pulling out of the rerun tomorrow. How are people feeling?
And it actually, Francis, makes this particular rerun of the presidential elections all more too tense, considering that you have Raila Odinga, who's decided that he will not be part of these elections. He said that he will not be part of the candidature. However, though, we understand that he didn't send a formal application or formal form to the IEBC saying that he retracts his candidature from these presidential polls that are expected to take place from tomorrow on. The polling stations expected to open around about 6 a.m. in the morning. And of course, there's these various issues that have been boiling and simmering under, considering that you have a number of court cases trying to stop these elections from going ahead. I counted at least 5 court cases when I got here. One of those court cases was, as you've indicated in that package that you played earlier on from Sarah Kimani, where an application was brought by the electorate, who argued that the elections should be postponed or the election should not continue tomorrow. However, though, as the Chief Justice indicated, that they couldn't quorate, so there wasn't enough justices to listen to that petition. But also another court case that happened, or ruling judgment that happened today, was a judgment around the returning officers who will be presiding over the elections at the 290 counties across Kenya. And that electoral court ruling, the High Court stating that the appointment of those returning officers was illegal and invalid. And it almost seems, though, that court ruling by itself lays the foundation for this elections that will be held tomorrow to be appealed, to be contested by any of those contenders who are contesting these elections, whether it be even a normal, an ordinary citizen from Kenya. Let me bring in Sarah Kimani, who's been following this electoral process. It's been since August the 8th, and since August the 8th, after Raila Odinga had their press briefing, or it was the NASA press briefing where Raila Odinga wasn't speaking, but NASA said that they believe that it is Raila Odinga who has won those elections. But the IEBC's announcement was that actually it was Uhuru Kenyatta who won by, there was a 10% difference between the two candidates.
Yes, and from there then we went to the courts. The Supreme Court on the 1st of September ruled that there were illegalities and irregularities in the way the election was conducted, and so they sent Kenyans back to the ballot and ordered a fresh elections within 60 days. Now, that has been now where we have been, the 60-day period almost coming to an end on the 31st of October, and that is when, up to when constitutionally a new election can be held. Now, Raila Odinga, the main candidate, has pulled out, one of the front runners has pulled out, indicating that the Electoral Commission has not been reformed, and as it stands, he says is biased. He also says several reforms that could have guaranteed a credible election have not happened. But even before we get to Odinga, in between there, we have had one of the commissioners resigning and leaving the country. A few days ago, we had the chairman of the commission saying he cannot guarantee a credible election. And at that point, everybody thought he was the one who would go to court to ask maybe for an interpretation, to ask for an extension for him to be able to guarantee a credible election. Instead, he remained. He said he was not resigning, and he 2 days yesterday, we got 3 voters saying they're moving to court to seek a delay, but that now has been stopped. And so this afternoon, Wafula Chebukati, the chairman of the Electoral Commission, announced that there is going to be an election tomorrow, temporarily putting at least the political uncertainty that has been in the country to a hold.
And it has been something that has been welcomed by the president. He addressed the nation a couple of hours ago, about 2 hours ago, and he called on Kenyans, saying that they must come out in their numbers to come out and vote. But he was also cognizant that there has been this call from Raila Odinga as well as NASA, calling on NASA supporters, saying that tomorrow there's no election that will be taking place, and NASA supporters should be staying away from the polls. also a bit of a shift from an earlier statement that he made where he said that the 26th of October will be a day of protest.
Yes, indeed. And what I got from President Kenyatta's address is that he was making an economic case for the election. He spoke about the electoral period having been too long, investments having been lost. The Kenya Private Sector Alliance only yesterday announced that 700 billion shillings has been lost during this electoral period, and especially during the time that they have waited to go back to fresh elections. And so he said now it's time to protect investments and for the country to go back to work. However, Raila Odinga, at a major rally that he held in Nairobi, insisted that Kenyans must boycott the polls, and he termed it a sham election. But he has moved away from the mass demonstrations that he had called for Thursday. This time, he's asking Kenyans to stay at home or to hold vigils and prayers for the country far away from the polling stations.
But it would seem that even though that he's made that call, that the government is still cautious. Even driving around Nairobi, you see that police are stationed across the various streets. They're quite vigilant. And the president also indicating in his speech earlier on to the nation that the government and the security contingent that has been put in place will ensure that every Kenyan, will ensure the security of every Kenyan, and that the rights of those who want to participate in these elections are upheld.
Yes, indeed. And we had earlier Fred Matiang'i, the acting cabinet secretary in charge of internal security, saying each polling station will have 2 police officers, but in areas that they have identified as hotspots for possible disruption of elections or possible violence, they're going to have more police officers. Indeed, if you look at the contingent of police officers that we have seen in the western town of Kisumu, the western town of Migori, and Homa Bay, some of the areas that have had daily protests since Odinga announced for daily protests, then you can be sure that security will be heightened. But I must say that there have now been calls for police to reduce the use of excessive force. We had head of the AU Observer Mission, Thabo Mbeki, the former president of South Africa, this afternoon calling for the rights of everyone to be protected, including those who want to go out on the streets to demonstrate. But he was also clear that if anybody wants to go and vote, then their right also should not be hindered.
And speaking about Thabo Mbeki, these elections, not only will the focus be on the IEBC and the electorate themselves, but also the observer missions, because after after the September 1st ruling, it shone a light on the role that these observer missions have been played, and also how they got to a point of declaring that the elections were at least credible, not free and fair, but rather credible.
Yes, and this afternoon, Mbeki reiterating that what they did is that they gave it a clean bill of health up to the voting process. And they said that from the counting to the tallying, they could not give a final observation. And they said they're not investigators but observers. However, what has happened now is that some of the international observers, including the Carter Center, the European Observer Mission, the European Union Observer Mission, have pull down or reduce the number of observers in the country. And they say it's because they're sensitive to the security situation in the country. And they're saying this time they're also changing the way that they're going to be observing, that they will not concentrate so much on the voting and the counting, because that seems to go very well. But they will be looking at the other systemic issues, the tallying and the transmission of results, and what happens at the National Tally Center. President Mbeki is saying that they will also be concentrating more on that, but they're probably the only ones who have not scaled down on their staff. And he says if that has happened, it's because of logistical issues and maybe lack of funding. But he insisted that the African Union is going to stand by Kenya, because they believe Kenya is an example to other democracies, that indeed you can go through a process like this and emerge more victorious than when you first went to the elections.
Well, yes, President Uhuru Kenyatta said exactly the same thing as well earlier on when he was addressing the nation, saying that many look to Kenya, and Kenya has displayed a level of maturity, a democratic maturity, and this time around the Kenyans should live up to that expectation that many expect Kenyans to rise again, even in the face of adversity, the adversity that the country is facing at the moment. And as Sarah has indicated, of course, a lot of vigilance, especially from the security side of things, and the situation pretty tense. And considering that you have the observer missions who have also scaled down based on their argument around the issue of the security detail and the security concerns that they have. But of course, myself, Aldrin St-Pierre, as well as Sarah Kemani, will keep you abreast tomorrow from around 6 a.m. from when the various counties, the various polling stations open at the 290 counties. And as you've indicated, there is that call from NASA, of course, calling on their supporters to stay away from the polling stations and rather have those night vigils or vigils and prayer sessions and not vote at all. We'll have to wait and see how Kenyans will respond to this call from NASA. Back to you in studio.